There we go. That worked. The Welcoming Congregation Program is a volunteer program for Unitarian Universalist congregations that want to take active steps to become more welcoming and inclusive of individuals with marginalized sexual orientation and gender identities. The Welcoming Congregation Program grew out of the recognition of existing prejudice and ignorance about LGBTQ people in Unitarian Universalism, resulting from exclusion in our congregations. Many, many years ago, Capital UU congregation did the work and held the vote and became a welcoming congregation. However, as far as I know, we've never renewed these promises or refreshed our training, so it's probably incorrect to say that we are still a capital W welcoming congregation, but I think we do a reasonable job. Just a quick word, Maria Nyland was a tireless worker for Unitarianism and one of the first members of our congregation. During the late 1990s, it was Maria who got Capital into the Victoria Pride Parade. Maria is quite ill at home now, and I want to dedicate this homily to her. Before I go on, I want to position myself as a straight man who is a historian by training. I'm doing this homily not as a representative of any group except Unitarian historians. I recognize the harms done to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer persons, and I sincerely hope that my homily will not make things worse. I also want to acknowledge that the letters LGBTQ are a minefield not only for straight folks, but even for academics who study gender. There are more letters that get added and subtracted depending on the audience. If you feel that I have left out the letter that represents you, then please know that I did not mean to offend. Perhaps you can educate me at another time. I hope that this homily will serve to advance our understanding of where we Unitarians have been and where we are now. There are three things I want to tell you this morning. I want to tell you how a riot outside a gay bar and an international medical crisis led Canadians of all affections to openly celebrate their GLBT neighbors in pride parades. I want to connect these stories with your story. And in the end, I want to exhort you to keep alive the spirit of pride, not just during one weekend per year, but all year. When I was a kid growing up in a mid-sized town in the BC interior, I was one of those kids whose quiver of taunts included the words fag, fairy, and homo. I knew that I was straight, for what it was worth. If I gave any thought to homosexuality, then it was only in passing. I remember that in grade 6, I learned that Elton John's writing partner, Bernie Taupin, had broken up because Elton was gay, and I did not question Bernie's decision, nor the reporting of the breakup. It was not until I was 28 that I learned from one of my close friends that he was gay. He was teaching little kids in a Roman Catholic school in a northern village, so he was deeply closeted. When he told me he was gay, my only thought was, how could I not know? He and I remained friends until I moved to another city. In 1992, as an unchurched humanist, while working alongside a New Testament fundamentalist, but wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's a little history for your Sunday morning. Amanda is shaking her head. Are you able to hear me? Or can somebody give me a thumbs up? Okay, good. 2,400 years ago, this will be brief, Socrates was a teacher in Athens. His student Plato wrote books that contained the ideas and teachings of Socrates. One of those books is called Symposium, a Greek word meaning drinking party. At this drinking party, Socrates and his intellectual friends argued that love between males is the highest form, while sex with women is lustful and utilitarian. Wise Socrates differs. Socrates argued that there is a love that is higher than the love of smooth-faced boys and women, the love of beauty. He doesn't tell his friends to give up their sexual affairs with men. Socrates simply says that physical love is not the highest kind. Because Plato wrote Symposium, we call this non-physical love Platonic in his honor. I tell this story because for many years it was not taught in its most accurate translation. For decades, Symposium was taught in English without the naughty bits about men having sex with men. Only once the student learned to read Greek, could he discover what all the fuss was about. That among the elites of Athens, birthplace of so much of our culture, men openly loved men and women openly loved women. It did not stay that way forever. Some of you at home staring into your Zoom screen might ask, what is the LGBT fuss all about? Why do Unitarian Universalists single out lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people as focus for concern? The UU minister Douglas Morgan Strong states it well in the Welcoming Congregation Manual. For centuries, churches have been a leading force against sexual minorities. It is not surprising that gay people are reluctant to reach out to the very institution that oppresses them. Yet gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual people have no less need for warmth, caring, and affirmation than anyone else who calls the liberal church their religious home. In fact, as a subculture in society, gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual people may need our support more than the general population. Those are words from the UU minister Doug Strong. Unitarian Universalism has made a name for itself as one of the most LGBTQ affirming denominations. Ours was the first religion to have an openly gay minister in 1969, the first to officially condemn discrimination against homosexuals in 1970, and the first to take an official stance on many matters of particular importance to LGBTQ people. The first documented same-sex weddings conducted by UU ministers were performed in Santa Monica, California in 1957 and in San Francisco in 58. In September 69, the Reverend James Stoll publicly came out as gay, making him the first ordained minister of a major religious group in the US or Canada to do so. In April 2000, Capitol called an interim minister to help us. The Reverend Dick Hastie and his life partner Richard Lincoln moved to Victoria and served for a few months before cancer led them to move back to the States. Capitol congregation was only 4 years old then and committed to being lay-led for the most part, but I'm proud to think that Capitol's first minister was a gay man. Some of you have heard of the Stonewall riots, so the next few minutes will be review. But I think it's a story worth reviewing, and it leads us to why the Pride Parade is held today. The Stonewall riots were a series of spontaneous violent demonstrations by members of the gay community against a police raid, which took place in the early morning hours of June 28, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn at Greenwich Village in New York City. The riots were widely considered to constitute the single most important event leading to the gay liberation movement and the modern fight for gay and lesbian rights in the United States. Because our societies are so closely tied, gay liberation in the States helped similar efforts in Canada. Gay Americans in the 1950s and 60s faced a legal system that was anti-homosexual. Early homophile groups in the US sought to prove that gay people could be assimilated into society, and they favored non-confrontational education for gays and straights alike. But the last years of the 1960s were very contentious. Many social movements were active, including African American civil rights movement, the counterculture of the 1960s, and the anti-war demonstrations. These influences, along with the liberal environment of Greenwich Village, served as catalysts for the Stonewall riots. Few establishments welcomed openly gay people in the 50s and 60s, and those that did were often bars. At that time, the Stonewall Inn was owned by the mafia. The inn catered to an assortment of patrons and was known to be popular among the poorest and most marginalized people in the gay community: drag queens, members of newly self-aware transgender community, effeminate young men, male prostitutes, and homeless youth. The Stonewall Inn was the only bar for gay men in New York City where dancing was allowed. Dancing was its main draw since its opening as a gay club. Police raids on bars were common, both in Canada and the United States, but on June 28th, police officers quickly lost control of the situation at Stonewall. They attracted a crowd that was incited to riot. Tensions between the police and the gay residents of Greenwich Village erupted, and there were protests the next evening and the next evening. Within weeks, Greenwich Village residents quickly organized into activist groups to concentrate efforts on establishing places for gays and lesbians to be open about their sexual orientation without fear of being arrested. On June 28, 1970, the first gay pride marches took place in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago, commemorating the anniversary of the riots. Today in Victoria and in cities around the world, pride parades celebrate our LGBTQ neighbors and family members. Visibility is still required 50 years later. The Stonewall fight is still not over. While there are parades everywhere, there is also violence and homophobia. Our continued participation in the parade signals that we stand firmly on the side of love. More than a decade ago, when First Unitarian Church of Victoria, our big sister church up in Saanich, interviewed prospective ministers Shauna and Melora Lingood, everything went so well. Rev. Shauna tells the story of one conversation with the Ministerial Search Committee. It went something like this. Shauna said to the committee, "The fact that we are women married to each other, that doesn't bother you." And the committee shook their heads. "The fact that we are an interracial couple, that doesn't bother you?" The committee shook their heads. "The fact that we're Americans, that doesn't bother you?" And the committee shook their heads. Shauna continues, "But because one of us believes in God and said his name during a service, that's what bothers you people?" Shauna and Melora were embraced and have served local Unitarianism for many happy years. The groundwork for their successful ministry was paved by a generation of LGBT ministers who have come before them. I am proud of every gay and lesbian wedding that I have officiated as a UU lay chaplain. When I sign their BC marriage license, I am keenly aware that I'm helping two loving people to do what the law did not allow until recently. And I try not to let UU hubris get the better of me when a couple contacts me and says, "We belong to another religion, but that religion will not sanctify our marriage, so we have been directed to the Unitarians." I am so proud to belong to Unitarianism. During the 1980s, a cruel new disease started killing gay men. HIV/AIDS had no cure for decades, and death in the 80s was inevitable. One effect of HIV and AIDS was that it rallied the gay community worldwide to fight for a cure. The deaths of so many young men gave gay villages the feeling of war zones. Condoms were known to prevent transmission of the disease, but not enough men took advantage of the protection. Bisexual men spread HIV to their female lovers, and one of the effects of which was to ostracize gay men from some of their strongest allies. Some lesbian groups distanced themselves from the wider GLBT movement because they saw HIV/AIDS was not their main issue as it was for gay men. Many churches refused to conduct funerals for men who had died of AIDS, but the Unitarians, Quakers, and downtown Christians worked to fill the gap by providing compassionate celebrations of life. For many gay men in Canada and the US, these actions cemented an enduring bond between the gay community and the Unitarians. And for those of you coming to the parade or the festival in Victoria today, you'll see that. I can only imagine what a pride parade would have been like in a neighborhood where a disease was snuffing the life out of the community. Marchers might have sung simply to hold back the tears. For men of a certain age, marching in a pride parade is a commemoration of lives lost. Earlier this morning, I said that in 1992, I was working alongside a New Testament fundamentalist. The all-powerful head of our corporation stated that to bring our organization into line with Canada's Bill of Rights, we were all to accept gays and lesbians in our ranks. My Christian work colleague was flummoxed. Sensing an easily exploitable soft spot, I teased him about his homophobia. Our argument got louder and louder until our boss entered the office and said, "The new rule is the rule. Accept it or resign." My colleague eventually resigned, but I liked my job, so I decided to embrace gays and lesbians. A few years later, I started attending Unitarian services, and I found myself virtually surrounded by gays and lesbians, who seemed so much like me that it confounded all of the things I'd learned in the BC interior as a kid. It did not take long for me to become an ally, and I am proud to say, and to march each year in the parade, I stand on the side of love. When I march in the Victoria Pride Parade each year, I march as an ally of LGBTQ persons in their struggle, and with the memory of the many who died of the cruel disease. Today I wanted to tell you about a riot outside a gay bar, about an international medical crisis which led Canadians of all affections to openly celebrate their GLBT neighbors in pride parades. I wanted to connect these stories with your story. And now at the end, I want to exhort you to keep the spirit and memory of pride alive all year. Go now in peace and happy pride. For our last song, I just got a note. Yeah, Holly Near, we are a